I want to welcome you to the Retro Rogues live show. Please pay attention to our fancy warning graphic. It tells you that the Retro Rogues live show is intended for an adult audience and not intended for children under the age of 13. Parental discretion is advised. So tonight I'm not going to give any weird, wax poetic, we may or not curse, all that kind of stuff. Most of you who are watching are well into this now and know how the show goes. So I'm just going to get right into it. My name is Dave Beatty. I'm one of your hosts. For nearly the last 30 years, I've been a professional illustrator and graphic designer. Worked on a lot of fun things that some people have heard of. Let's be a little different tonight. Things like Irredeemable and Fathom. And my current love, Red Skirts. Anyhow, enough about that. I want to welcome back my co-host. This is Mr. Eric Alexander. Eric, please tell the folks, hopefully watching or listening at home, some of the fun things that you've done as a creative professional.
Yes, hello, everyone. I am Eric Alexander, also known as Bass God 14. That's Bass God 14, BASSGOD 14. That's not Bass God, like a bass guitar. And I am the co-host of Retro Rogues Live. I am also the chief financial officer of Bad Bob Productions, which is a small production company in Arizona. And I was also the editor and co-publisher of the Occupants official comic book tie-in. It was the Occupants feature film. We actually did a comic book tie-in for that, and I was the editor and the co-publisher for that publication. And Dave was actually the artist on that project.
Very true. Very true. It was a fun project to be on, although there was a couple of points where I was pulling my hair out, but it was fun all the way. Nonetheless, it was a lot of fun. So
there were a lot of points you were pulling your hair out on that project. That was an interesting project to say the least. Although the finished product, I think, was awesome. Very hard to get, by the way, folks. Very hard to get. Very exclusive thing. I think 300, 400 print run was about it. Yeah. We do have a couple hellos. Manasan is in the house. Manasan, hello.
Hello.
Good to see you. Joss, good to see you as well. And by the way, that does remind me, Manasan, you are in the YouTube chat. So if you happen to see any weird things happening there, Manasan, let me know. We recently had our last live stream banned on YouTube, and I still don't know why. We were banned for violating community standards, which of course is kind of a meaningless term. I've appealed that decision, but at this time, I don't know what's going on. It was reported to me last time that about 20 minutes into our live stream, a friend of mine who was on the YouTube lost the signal. So something happened. Somebody reported us, or it was some sort of an algorithm glitch. But Manasan, if you can definitely check in every once in a while and let us know that you're still there and that the YouTube feed is working, we would appreciate that. And of course, that's the way YouTube is these days. Oh, and along those lines, I am working harder on the Twitch channel as a result of our recent ban on YouTube. I am actually, I went ahead, I normally do clips of our show on the YouTube channel. So I take every subject and I make a shorter clip of it. Because we only have 20 minutes of footage from the last stream on YouTube, I was only able to make 2 smaller clips out of that. But I did make clips on the Twitch account. So if anybody's interested on our Twitch account, which is at BassGod14, I actually did make individual clips of all the different subjects. And some of those subjects were only like a minute or 2 long. So just something to be aware of, folks. If you maybe missed the last broadcast, only about 20 minutes of it is available on YouTube. It is available in its entirety, though, on Twitch, on Facebook, and on Twitter Periscope. So just a little bit of housekeeping there, Dave.
Very cool. And I was going to mention, too, we're probably still another week, maybe a week and a half out from having the digital magazine, the fanzine, ready to go. I'm still waiting on a few more things to come in from a few additional contributors, and then I'm spending a little bit too much time on my story pages. Eric has been seeing how some of that stuff is coming together. I think it's looking pretty
awesome.
decent.
It's looking awesome, folks. It's looking awesome.
I think everyone will be very pleased once we're there. I would tease some of the art, but I really want to hold it in reserve and for the actual publication, because I want people to really be surprised with what it is. But again, we're about another week, maybe week and a half out, but it should be coming out very, very soon. And then I'm feeling a little under the weather tonight, so I'm probably not going to be on the video chat. But tonight's card, we're going to do that Batman animated sketch card. I think everyone's seen that one before, at least I hope anyway. So that's the card that we'll be doing this evening will be Batman the Animated Series sketch card. And I think with that, are we ready to get going, Eric?
I just want to acknowledge Jane. Jane is also saying hi. Joss said that we are some naughty boys for getting banned on YouTube. I guess we are, Joss. Although I think more likely than not, we just tripped the algorithm somehow. That is an issue with YouTube, by the way. That's the first thing you see on the dashboard. For any of you that are YouTube content creators, I'm sure you're familiar with this. First thing you see on the dashboard is YouTube tells you they got rid of a bunch of their human reviewers and the algorithm is tripping without cause. It actually says that. YouTube actually says that, like, hey, you might be taken down for no reason, just so you're aware of that, because we got rid of a bunch of our human reviewers. And Man of Sand did say that he will be sure to speak up if he sees anything weird going on the YouTube there. So.
Trippin' Without Cause sounds like an interesting 90s hip-hop album. Trippin' Without Cause.
It does. It does.
Anyway. Yeah. Okay. Are we good to go ahead and get into our main topic?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Very cool. So I'm going to read the synopsis here just real quick. We are going to be talking about Code 8. Code 8 is a new film that's available on Netflix. The basic short summary is a superpowered construction worker falls in with a group of criminals in order to raise the funds to help his ill mother. I think I would probably sum this up as sort of like X-Men meets The Town. That would be sort of the way I would kind of summarize this. It was directed by Jeff Chan. I think the thing that most people would be aware of is that this is Stephen Amell and Robbie Amell's, the Amell brothers. This is, I think, their project, isn't it, Eric?
Yes, I think that's correct. That sounds right.
Stephen Amell, I think most of our viewers or listeners would be familiar with, of course, played Arrow in the Arrow show, or Green Arrow in the Arrow show. Robbie Amell has a special place in my heart because he played Firestorm. He played Ronnie Raymond, which, of course, I think some of our viewers, listeners are aware that I actually worked on Firestorm once upon a time for DC Comics. Plus Firestorm's always just been one of my favorite characters, so I'm a little partial to Firestorm. And it had an interesting cast. A lot of it are just mostly character actors. Quite a few of them I didn't really recognize from anything in particular, but I thought the cast was pretty good. And it was interesting because I'm glad I didn't put a date on this, because I would have said it was 2020, because I think it came out fairly recently, or maybe it just landed on Netflix really recently, because IMDb is saying this film is actually from 2019. Well, let's just go ahead.
It actually got a limited theatrical release. It did. It got a limited theatrical release. It was a crowdfunded, I believe, on Indiegogo, which was one of the reasons that I thought this would be an interesting film to check out, because this film was crowdfunded. It is an independent film, despite the fact that there are a few names in it that you might recognize. But as Dave was mentioning, there's a lot of people in this movie I've never seen before, a lot of actors I've never seen before. But yeah, this movie was crowdfunded, and apparently it did have a limited theatrical release. Man of Sand says he just think that Code 8 came out in December of 2019. I'm not sure if that's correct, but that sounds like it could be right. I do know that it had a limited theatrical release, though, in addition to being on Netflix now.
Well, interesting. So I'm just as slightly confused as the radio guy I was making fun of a few days ago, who was saying that Sonic the Hedgehog had been delayed and probably wouldn't be coming out until after we get past the current global pandemic. So let me apologize for that. I didn't realize that Code 8 had a theatrical release. To me, I thought it had because it just kind of showed up on Netflix, seemed like a couple days ago. and then we had been agonizing over whether or not to watch the second episode of The Witcher. Or at least I had been agonizing over whether or not to watch the second episode of Witcher. And then Eric had brought up this film and said, "What about Code 8?" And I was like, "Oh, well, it looked kind of interesting." I think that synopsis is pretty good. It is kind of, or you could even say Heroes meets the town. It's kind of in that sort of. I think that's a pretty good sort of high elevator pitch for it. And design wise, I felt like in times it reminded me of Neil Blomkamp, the director who did things like District 9 and Elysium. There was something about the style of this film that reminded me of Neil Blomkamp. So tell me, Eric, what were your initial impressions?
Even the image we have up here, I mean, it's very District 9, and also what was it, Chappie?
Yeah, Chappie.
Right?
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah, for sure. I'm one of those rare people. I kind of enjoyed Chappie. So tell me, Eric, what were your initial impressions of Code 8?
Well, you kind of mentioned some things that definitely stick out to me. You mentioned District 9. We were just talking about Chappie, which I haven't seen. I've seen the trailers for Chappie, but I did see District 9. And then I have seen, of course, most of the X-Men films. I think you talked about X-Men. This is very X-Men, very, very X-Men. And to me, it's X-Men basically with some allegories to illegal immigration and also to, I guess you would say, racism, which of course X-Men had a lot of that in it. Basically a lot of elements of discrimination and things like that. So to me, that's kind of how I felt about it as far as like the tone and feel of the film. It was very, very X-Men to me. And you kind of had touched on that, Dave. Is that how you felt as well?
Yeah. It reminded me. It's got a lot of themes that people who are fans of the X-Men comics would be familiar with. The idea of having, being born with abilities and being hunted, of course, those elements with the Sentinels, hunting the mutants and stuff in X-Men. I would definitely say that it had, because that's, like I said at the beginning, it definitely has shades of X-Men, for sure.
Manasan mentions that Blomkamp also did Chappie, which had a similar robot character. And as you mentioned, these Guardians here, we have one of them pictured in the promo pic here. I felt an immense Sentinel vibe to them. I mean, immensely. Although they weren't they didn't appear to be as intelligent as the Sentinels. In fact, or if they are simply, part of the drone package that they're delivered in, I wasn't clear about that, how autonomous these things are. The Sentinels, of course, were like fully autonomous and almost had their own, were characters in and of themselves, So I'm curious to see, because I'm sure that there's going to be a sequel to this. I'm just like 100% positive, especially with it doing so well on Netflix right now. It's in their top 10 on Netflix right now. I'm sure there's going to be a sequel. It has an open-ended ending. So I'm kind of curious to see how these Guardians will develop as the series goes on.
Yeah, like I said, I was kind of surprised because I didn't realize we were going to have these kind of robot kind of characters in it, because the only image I'd seen before I started watching it after we discussed was it's an image of like Robbie Amell, and he's got like some kind of electricity thing kind of happening with his fingers. And then Stephen Amell is behind him. Even though they're brothers, they don't play brothers in the film. And so that was the only image I kind of had seen. And then they kind of had a trailer for it, because kind of auto plays sometimes on Netflix, a little annoying, but kind of started to auto play the movie or the beginning of the movie, and I was like, this looks kind of interesting. And that was before we had discussed actually reviewing it for the show. And I did get definitely an X-Men vibe. And then as I was watching it, like I said, it reminded me very much of Blomkamp. There's a lot of things I quite like District 9. Talking about Neil Blomkamp just briefly. Like I said, I did like Chappie. I also kind of liked Elysium. I know a lot of people didn't like Elysium, but I love a lot of the design work in Elysium. I thought the design work was really cool. So I enjoyed seeing these kind of robot guys and kind of the near future, kind of aspect of this production. And you could tell at times that they were kind of little limited in budget kind of here and there, but I thought they did pretty good with the budget that they had. So we'll get into just initial impressions. Let's see. How do I feel about this overall? I enjoyed it. I didn't think it was the greatest thing I'd ever seen per se, but I did quite enjoy it. I saw that most of the reviews had it somewhere between like a 6 out of 10, kind of rating. I mean, it's not too highly rated, but I know it's doing really well on Netflix. And I think it's doing really well on Netflix because it's a very interesting concept. When Eric and I were talking, Eric, you had mentioned that the most interesting thing you thought about the film was actually the backstory that they actually kind of hint at as the opening credits are kind of starting. And I thought the backstory they hinted at was really interesting. The idea that people had been born with powers and helped build the cities and all that stuff was really very interesting. So I do think that if they're going to do a sequel, which I would be interested to see a sequel, especially if it's on Netflix, because I'm already subscribed, But no, I thought it was interesting. And I think it's one of those things, if you're looking for something to try, I'd say this is worth giving a shot. So that's going to be my overall initial impressions of Code 8. What would you say, Eric? Would you recommend this just in your initial impressions, or?
Yeah, I probably would. For what it is, I think it's okay. I mean, I know what I heard was that the budget was about $2.5 million, and for $2.5 million, it's pretty darn awesome.
Really good for that. Looks really good for that.
So I think it was put together fairly well. There is a lot of sort of cliched characters in this, and a lot of sort of, I would say, sort of clumsy analogies to our world in it. Again, like I was mentioning, there's definitely some connections and some statements being made about things like illegal immigration and undocumented workers and things like that. I mean, that's directly part of the film, undocumented workers, because that's the idea, is that basically if you're superpowered, you have to have some sort of licensing to use your powers at work. And if you don't have that licensing, it's illegal for you to use your powers at work. And thus, a lot of these superpowered people have become sort of second-class citizens. I was talking about sort of the quality of the film, and Man of Sand mentioned that he thought the effects were done by Weta Digital, which I can't confirm or deny. I don't know exactly which effect shop did it, but I did think the effects were done very, very well in this film, especially for the budget that they had, for a $2.5 million budget. And Man of Sand also mentions that if you like Blomkamp's work, and you can check out various content produced by Oats Studio on YouTube, some of which comes, I guess, directly from him. So that's something that's interesting. And I was going to mention, speaking of YouTube, my understanding is that the original short film that this film is based on, which is also another kind of connection to District 9, because District 9 was basically a feature film that was made off of a short film concept. So they did a short film first, made sure the concept worked. They did the effects and things like that, and then they were able to sell the finished work. And they did the same thing here. They made a sort of proof of concept short film, which I haven't had a chance to see yet. I actually want to see it quite badly, but I didn't have a chance to watch it before the show. And then they used that as sort of their proof of concept. But then they took that to an audience. They took it they did the crowdfunding route. They used that proof of concept to get people to contribute, just regular people to contribute to the film. If you watch the credits of this film, they're ginormous, and it's not because of the huge effects team. It's because of all the contributors from the crowdfunding, which I always get a kick out of, because Occupants, for instance, the feature film that I was involved with, that was crowdfunded, and I've been involved with numerous crowdfunding projects as well. So I thought that was pretty neat. Josh says, by the way, get better, Dave. Missed the mug.
I've got a face for radio. I don't think you're missing anything, but
And then Manasan said, no, I mean the FX for the movies Dave mentioned. Okay, thank you, Manasan, for the clarification. So he was talking about the FX for Elysium, Chappie, District 9. They were from Weta. And thank you for the clarification, Manasan. I appreciate that. As I said, I don't know who did the effects on this particular film. But I thought they were doing very well. In particular, you can see that the graphic that we have up. And I thought the Guardians were done quite well. I liked how they came out, and I also liked how the drones that they're deployed from, they did a good job with that effect. So, overall, I think the look and the feel, the cinematography, seemed very competent to me. So, in regards to that, I think it was done quite well. I just think a lot of the situations and a lot of the characters were very stereotyped to me, for lack of a better word. What do you think about that, Dave?
Well, I think it's a lot of things that we've seen before, but because they're playing with a lot of, again, I think concepts that we're very familiar with. When we talk about the connections, the allusions to X-Men, there's been a lot of superhero shows. When you look at things like Unbreakable. There's just this kind of material has been very well explored now, but I didn't think it was bad necessarily. I mean, was it a little? Because the thing I found most interesting was sort of like the setting and what they were trying to do with it, and I was kind of surprised at how kind of engaged I was with it at times, because I like I said, I did enjoy it, and I do think if you're curious about it, I definitely think it's worth giving it a shot and checking it out and seeing what you think. But yeah, I mean, it's stuff that we've kind of seen before. My big takeaway from this, I was thinking about, is by the time that Marvel actually gets around, the MCU gets around to actually doing X-Men, I'm beginning to wonder how much of this, this material is still there for them to explore. When you look at everything that Fox did with the X-Men films, and you look at projects like this, like Code 8, when you look at things like Heroes, we've explored a lot of these concepts pretty far. So I'm curious to see what or how Marvel's going to approach the X-Men, because I feel like that on the independent side, a lot of people, you can tell, love the X-Men, love the concepts and the ideas of the X-Men, because we keep seeing them being explored, through different productions in different kinds of ways. So that was my kind of big takeaway from watching this. I kept thinking, it's like, wow, by the time the MCU gets around to X-Men, what's going to be left for them to really explore?
Well, I have an answer to that. I don't think Marvel's going to listen to me, but I have an answer to that, which is I think most superhero concepts are what I call character-driven. In other words, if you're going to be writing about Superman or Batman, obviously you're making it a quote unquote Batman story, a Superman story. You're making it's character driven. You're trying to put the character in different interesting situations that challenge that character, that relate to the lore of that character. And although X-Men is probably the most story driven superhero group that I'm aware of, I still think the characters are what people are really drawn to. The concept is, like you said, is obviously very popular, especially right now, especially with the way Hollywood is right now. The concept is obviously going to be popular because it fits with a certain agenda, and it plugs well into that. But I think the thing, for instance, that the newer X-Men films were missing was that emphasis on the characters that we really enjoy and keeping those characters true to themselves. For instance, I know a lot of people that were upset about the new X-Men films because they didn't like Mystique becoming a good guy, that becoming an X-Men. Because to a lot of people, Mystique is and always will be, part of the Brotherhood of Mutants and a villain. And so when you kind of screw that up for whatever reason, because of the actress or whatever, I don't know, whatever reason they decide to do that route, there's a lot of people that didn't like that. So I think if you stay true to the characters, because a lot of people really love the characters, and I think that's true of any popular superhero story when it comes to whether it's animated, live action, the comics, character is key. And while you're right, this concept has been kind of used and almost overused now, and it's very popular in Hollywood right now to use this kind of concept. But it's all about the characters. And I would say, if anything, this film lacked that a little bit. There was a little bit of a lack of character development. What do you think of that, Dave?
No, I would say that it's definitely it is very story driven, and it yeah, I could see that. But I think that's part of the reason too why I think some of the characters come across as being kind of stereotypical. I think they are kind of playing it to type. They're kind of going, well, everyone kind of knows who this character is. Everyone kind of knows who this kind of character is. I think that's why certain elements of this film felt so familiar to me, because I felt like that they, in addition to, you know, playing off of elements from things like The Town, and which I did mention, and then X-Men, you know, I think that's I kept seeing a lot of connections to Elysium, for example. I mentioned it earlier, but beyond just the science fiction kind of aspects of it, but I felt like there was it's kind of that inner city, you know, kind of thing. I don't know how else better to describe it other than to say that I think they were kind of leaning into that so that you kind of know who those characters are, and then to focus on mostly pushing the story forward.
The lovable characters from the wrong side of the tracks, that's a trope we've seen since the beginning of storytelling. You know, since the beginning of that concept. You know what I mean? Because that's definitely in this, is that sort of the sympathetic characters that are, you know, they've had the tough life and the tough upbringing, you know, they're from the wrong side of the tracks, from the wrong part of town. You know what I mean?
No, yeah. I totally get that. But I don't know. I felt like to an extent they were kind of leaning into those tropes, though, thinking it's like, well, everyone kind of knows who these characters are. And I think maybe that's why we didn't get more character development. I would have liked to have seen more character development. But like I said, overall, too, I did enjoy it, you know, so I didn't, I don't have a lot of nitpicks for it, especially when you realize what the budget was. I mean, this is a pretty well put together production once you consider what the budget is. I mean, that's a pretty polished film for that amount of money. So,
yeah, I think it's extremely polished. This film doesn't reek of cheap in any way, shape, or form, which is a typical problem, even in that range, especially for a science fiction film or a genre film. So I have nothing to say bad about that. I think the production quality was excellent. I think the story is competent, but again, the character development is a little weak. And I think that there's some characters that I would like to have seen more of that we're not going to. And that always irritates me when that happens. But I definitely would overall recommend it and say that it's a good film. But I would definitely recommend. I can see why it's trending on Netflix, you know?
Yeah. I could see in a few years where with a certain segment, this could be like a cult classic kind of film. And I could definitely see there being a sequel down the road.
And Joss kind of cuts to the chase. He says, so overall, it didn't suck. And Joss, yes, I would say that. That's definitely kind of where I'm coming. Overall, it didn't suck. But Dave, I would like to actually get into spoiler territories with you about a few things I am going to nitpick on, if that's okay with you.
Okay. Go right ahead.
So this is the spoiler warning that I'm putting out there for you folks, because I was talking about character development and the fact that some of the characters that we're stuck with at the end of this movie, and I am saying stuck with because I didn't particularly like them. There's some characters that I found very unlikable. To me, the main character is very much the Spider-Man 3 version of Sandman. Do you feel me on that, Dave?
I could see that, yeah.
Which I hated. That's something that I hated about Spider-Man 3. I hated that entire arc that they decided to do, that Sandman was the guy who actually killed Uncle Ben, and he did it because he was trying to get money for his sick daughter. In this case, it's the main character is trying to get money for his sick mother. And I really have a hard time justifying murder and accessory to murder under any circumstances, okay? I know I'm wacky and weird that way. I know I'm wacky and weird that way because that seems to be kind of the cool, hip thing. But I do not justify murder or an accessory to murder in any way, shape, or form simply because you need money and you have a good reason for needing money. I can understand the Les Miserables thing of, hey, I stole a loaf of bread because I was starving and I shouldn't be hunted for the rest of my life for that. I get that. I do. I'm with that concept. But when you murder someone or you are involved in the murder of people who, especially who are innocent and have nothing to do with this situation, yeah, you got to pay for that. There should be some consequences for that. That was a big issue I had with Star Trek Picard, was all the murder that was happening and there's no consequence. This is kind of that concept of Star Trek Picard of, I'm done murdering people. Yeah, I don't like that. I don't buy that. But I will say this, in terms of again, some characters that I would like to have seen more, we have this sort of little ensemble of this sort of motley crew, again, if you will, that are doing these robberies and things. And I was intrigued by the mute character, the deaf character that was doing the signing, and he had, I guess, what they called the brawn power. Is that how they refer to it, Dave? Like he was a brawn.
Yeah, he was superhuman, like strength. Yeah.
But I think that's how they called it. They called it like you're a brawn. You have this like super strength power. And I was intrigued by that because you don't really see that, right, Dave? I mean, that's something new. That really is something kind of new where you see a kind of a main character. He's super strong, but he's deaf and he's signing and things like that. And they killed him. And I was just like, whoa, wait a second. That's like, that would have been a cool character to explore more. He was even doing the whole thing where the main character couldn't understand him and he kept basically insulting him without the main character knowing he was insulting him because he doesn't know how to sign. I thought it was kind of cool. I thought it was a neat concept. And I would like to have seen that character explored more, and they killed him.
Yeah, it was kind of unfortunate because there was a point at which I was like, okay, I think he's going to die, and then it looked like they were going to kind of try and keep him around, and of course he didn't make it. But yeah, because they quite a few of them, they kind of get ambushed there towards the end of the film, and they get double crossed and.
Which nobody could see that coming, right, Dave? We couldn't see that double cross coming a mile away.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was a little, like I said, there was points of the film that was by the numbers. I get that. But I guess it's just because I like this kind of material, superpowers, science fiction. I tend to cut things a lot of slack if it's kind of in a genre wheelhouse that I enjoy. And like I said, out of all the X-Men stuff that we've seen done live action, we haven't really seen anything that was kind of like a heist film or a caper. And this kind of had elements at times of a heist film or a caper. And so I kind of enjoyed that. That was the part to this I felt was kind of new, anyway, at least to this particular kind of genre. In terms of like the superhero stuff, we haven't seen a lot of heist and caper stuff. I mean, a little bit of that recently, but not too much.
I would agree with you there. That's true. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say because that was the part of this that I enjoyed the most. So did I see the double cross coming? Yes, I wasn't surprised when it happened. But at the same point, too, I just kind of enjoyed just kind of the fact that they were doing that, the way that they had kind of put this film together. And I was just kind of enjoying because my wife and I, we just actually recently, we watched all of Good Girls and made our way through Good Girls. And and Good Girls has a lot of that. It's a lot of, they have, episodes that are like heists and stuff and whatever. And so I just kind of enjoyed being in that sort of a story, but with superhero characters. So, not superhero, super powered characters. These are not heroes. These are super powered characters.
No, these are anti-heroes. Obviously, this is the anti-hero thing. It's got to be edgy. It's got to be dark. It can't just be actual heroes. In fact, I think the only character that came off as actually heroic was the police officer, the Asian police officer. He's the only character I think that comes off more or less as actually a conflicted but more or less heroic character, because even most of the other police officers don't come off as all that sympathetic, but he does. So I think that's an interesting character. I'm glad that he's still around because I think that his story will be interesting. because obviously I think this is set up for a sequel. But another character I was a little disappointed about is I do get disappointed. I've said this many times in the MCU. They have a big villain problem, and part of the villain problem is they're always killing the villain off. The villain is very ineffective. But they had, to me, the quote-unquote main villain, I kind of knew he was going to die because he seemed incompetent. He seemed kind of weak. He was using the one character that was a healer to keep himself alive because he's an addict. And that's a big part of this story, obviously. Is addiction and drug traffic. But I didn't quite understand how his powers worked. Like I guess he's just kind of like Wolverine. Is that how you took it, Dave? The bald guy, the bodyguard for the main drug dealer, if you will. I was kind of intrigued by that character because he seemed like he was just really a force to be reckoned with.
I think he was, well, Wolverine-like. I mean, he was just a very physical kind of villain. Because you see where he gets shot and he's like pulling bullets and stuff out of his chest, but he didn't seem to be quite. Well, I don't know, because in the comics there's all different versions of that kind of power. Like certain character, like for example, Aquaman isn't quote unquote totally invulnerable, but because he can withstand the pressures when he comes up on land, bullets and stuff like that can kind of embed in his skin, but they don't necessarily break his skin. And they kind of, you know what I mean? But it doesn't mean has a mutant healing factor either. So yeah, I could kind of see that. I mean, but again, if they were going to lean into the trope, I think if they'd leaned into the Wolverine trope a little bit more, I think I would have found that character even more entertaining. If he was just a little bit more, Wolverine-ish. You know what I mean? In terms of his mannerisms and stuff, that would have been kind of fun, and again, that's what I'm saying. There's a way to lean into the tropes where it's kind of fun, and you realize it's like, oh, this character's like this, this character, you know what I mean? And you're kind of curious to see what kind of decisions they're going to make and how far they're going to take it. But yeah, I could see he was definitely an enforcer, kind of character for sure. So
I think there would have been more potential for that character, especially with his boss being dead, that he could have some sort of a vendetta like in the next film. You know what I mean? I think there was a perfect opportunity to set that up. And again, I just thought that the character was intriguing because he seemed like he was extremely competent. He was obviously extremely tough. Two of the main characters have to take him on together in order to defeat him. Which is always the kind of thing you want to see from a great villain, that basically one of them couldn't take him by themselves. I love that, as far as a great villain, a villain that two of the heroes need to take on because one of them by themselves would get their ass kicked. I like that kind of stuff. That stuff gets me excited. And I'm just like, and then they kill them. And then it's kind of funny because as far as the villains go, if you will, like the ones they have direct contact with, again, they're all dead. So now we're kind of left in this position where it looks like we're going to go to the next level because these guys were sort of like middlemen in this drug trade. So now we're going to look at the higher fish because we have that scene at the end. There's a scene at the end where basically one of the characters is giving a big stash of the drugs they recovered to the main guy, the guy that's the head of the trust, I think is what they call it. So these are the guys that are like the cartel, if you will. And these guys were more of sort of like the distribution people. But there's no direct connection to them. So it's kind of like you're like, okay, so I guess they're going to take on the next level at some way, shape, or form. But one of the main characters is himself a drug dealer. And that was his whole motivation, was he wanted a bigger piece of the drug dealing. So it's like, well, he's not very sympathetic. The main character, obviously his motivation seems to be gone now because he was motivated by his mother. Well, that motivation is gone. And then we're kind of left with this one character that is a drug addict, and she's the healer. And we kind of get a little bit more sense of what her deal was. And apparently she was protecting her father, who owed these drug dealers money. And, she's like, okay, I guess something's going to happen with that. But I was kind of like, that character to me was, again, very underdeveloped, and I didn't have a lot of sympathy for her because it just seemed kind of like, I don't know, it's hard to explain. Like, I just didn't feel a whole lot of sympathy for her because she basically had become this this sort of tool of the villain, you know, that basically she was just healing him and keeping him alive, even though he was this despicable, awful person, and he was holding this situation with her father over her. And it's kind of like, well, why don't you just let him die? Then he would that situation would be resolved. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So that's kind of like, that's where I'm kind of having the issues. Like, a lot of the characters that survive at the end, I'm kind of like not sure exactly where we're going with this. That's going to be in like, you know, an interesting direction. Whereas a lot of the characters that died, I think you could have had a really interesting direction to go with them.
Yeah, I could see that. Well, and something else is interesting too. I thought the drug that they had that they were kind of featuring in the film, the idea that it was being taken from the powered people's, like, what was it, like, it was like their spinal fluid or whatever.
Yeah, spinal fluid. Yeah,
and in order to, yeah, exactly, and in order to harvest it, you know, they sometimes seem to be thinking or describing it as that they were like victims. I thought that was interesting too. So there's, like I said, there's a lot of interesting concepts in this film.
Yeah, and that obviously was a nod to, I think, human trafficking, because in human trafficking they talk about the idea that prostitutes are not victims. So that's what I felt that they were trying to get that vibe there, about the controversy of whether the people that were having the spinal fluid drained, whether they were accessories to the crime or not, or whether they should be treated as victims. I took that to be basically analogous to human trafficking, because that's the current thinking right now with human trafficking, is that prostitutes should not be considered victims should not be considered suspects because they're considered victims of the human traffickers. I think that's what they were going for.
Right. Well, unless you have anything else you want to talk about on the spoiler side, I don't have much else to discuss with this. Like I said, overall, I think if you're curious about it, you're interested in it, I think it's worth checking out.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I do think it's worth checking out. Again, even just for the aspect of that this film was done with such a low budget, and the fact that it has become so successful on Netflix, and that it has made the top 10 most popular on Netflix. That's a new feature that Netflix has now, where they basically tell you what their top 10 most popular things are, whether it's a series or a movie or whatever. They're ranked, and then you can go ahead and check them out. So it's basically like recommended by them at this point. It's highlighted and spotlighted by them. And I think that's a great achievement for an independent film. As an independent filmmaker myself, I think that's awesome. I know how hard it is to actually get into Netflix. In other words, in terms to either get a Netflix project, or like in this case, this isn't a Netflix project. This is an independent project that they were able to sell to Netflix. And I think that's really cool. And that's something that that's something that I think is really cool. And I'm really kind of excited about myself as an independent filmmaker. Is I'm like, the fact that they were able to make this on what essentially is a shoestring budget, because even though $2.5 million is like $1 gajillion to me right now, it's still a relatively small budget for Hollywood. And this definitely has the feel of an actual Hollywood film. And they made this independently. They made this with fans. They made this with regular people who contributed to it through their crowdfunding. And they were actually able to get it a limited theatrical release, which that's huge, by the way. Just getting any kind of theatrical release is a big deal because it's so hard to get film distribution. But then on top of that, on top of getting a limited theatrical release, they got it on Netflix, and they actually are successful on Netflix. They're actually in the top 10. They're recommended. They're spotlighted. That's the reason I even found out about this. I didn't even find out about it from Netflix. I actually found out about it because of a Wired article that was talking about this, and talking about this cool phenomenon of a film like this being successful on Netflix. Because I remember I was talking with Dave off the air. I remember back in the day when Netflix first started, basically it was almost all independent films. And then it shifted and it seemed like it was all sort of like legacy content. Like it was all like older shows and movies from established, Hollywood properties. And now we're kind of in this third phase where now it seems to be all about the new content that Netflix is providing. And when I say new content, I'm talking about the stuff that Netflix is producing essentially in-house, the stuff that they're financing themselves and greenlighting themselves. Well, this goes all the way back to the beginning of Netflix. When you could get your independent film on Netflix, you could get great exposure, you could make some money, and you could actually become successful through the streaming platform. So this does kind of excite me in a lot of ways, and I just hope it's an indication of more things to come, because it's a great business model for Netflix because they don't really have to worry about the initial investment. Granted, 2.5 million is peanuts to them. They could make a film like this probably pretty easily. But the thing is that it's neat to see that maybe, just maybe, this is going to start a trend, and maybe we are going to see more independent content, more films, even more series that are actually produced independently that Netflix will pick up. And then it will give them a chance to find an audience and all that kind of stuff. So that's the other thing that I think is really, really intriguing about this.
Yeah, and I would have to say that's my hope too, is that this does lead to more independent productions and creates because at the end of the day, that was kind of the hope with a lot of what's going on right now with streaming, is that it would actually create more opportunities for independent creators, and people looking to break into the business. I mean, that's kind of at least for me anyway, that's what I was kind of hoping for, is to see, more different creative visions being expressed, you know what I mean? And different kinds of projects kind of coming from, all different, kinds of, creators. I mean, that's the hope, right? So
absolutely,
yeah. So I hope that that's what this leads to. I'm going to second that. I definitely hope that that's what this leads to. And then when we were discussing this before, I was kind of shocked to hear that apparently it is more difficult to get a production onto Netflix than I had realized. I had thought that, not that it was an open, kind of platform like YouTube where you just post something up, and there you go. I mean, I knew there was, gatekeepers and stuff, but I had hoped that it was a little bit more open to independent, creators and such. But maybe it's not as open as I had originally thought. So
yeah, it's exactly the opposite. It's extremely hard to get into Netflix right now. It really is, because Netflix is doing so many of their own projects. They don't have an open submission policy where you can just submit your film to them. You have to go through certain gatekeepers, whether it's a distributor, certain agents, things like that. It's definitely not an open-ended process. It's actually very, very difficult. I know people that actually work in Hollywood and they cannot get into Netflix at all. They can't even crack the door open.
Interesting. So if that's good, are we ready to go ahead and move into pop culture news?
Sounds good to me.
Oh, we got the Streaming Wars banner up.
Sorry about that.
All right, there we go. That's all good. All right, so on this segment, we talk about interesting things that are happening in the world of pop culture news. This could be anything that catches either mine or Eric's attention that we think is worth bringing up and discussing with you, our viewer, our dear valued listener, just whatever kind of interesting things that kind of occurred over the course of the last week. Now, the one that I wanted to bring up here just real briefly, because I don't have a link for it. I ran out of time. I got stuck at my day job a little bit longer than I wanted. But it's interesting. On IndieWire, they had a story where they talked about, of course, The Mandalorian Season 2 won't be hitting Disney Plus until October, but they are producing a Disney Gallery, The Mandalorian. It's actually going to be an 8-episode documentary series that pulls back the curtain on The Mandalorian. Each chapter explores a different facet of the first live-action Star Wars television show through interviews, never-before-seen footage, and roundtable conversations hosted by, of course, series executive producer Jon Favreau. So this looks like an interesting way to kind of delve into the creation of The Mandalorian. Of course, we talked previously on a previous episode about how they're using that. It's sort of like a giant projection screen, and they're actually filming live action essentially with this screen as a backdrop, and then the screen is at times interactive. I forget what they were calling that, but it was really interesting the way that they're creating The Mandalorian. And then I did actually find, I don't want to get too far into it. This is just to support what I was talking about. But there was an interesting article on VFX or VFXvoice.com. And they talked about how the miniature work highlights hybrid approach to The Mandalorian. And I didn't realize that some of the ship effects in The Mandalorian were actually, live action and shot on a blue screen and stuff. With motion control, I had thought that was all just, CGI. So anyhow, I just thought this was kind of interesting. So I'm kind of excited for this Disney Gallery 8-part on The Mandalorian, talking about how they're creating the show.
That's really cool. That image that you have up is really cool too, about the miniature work. I didn't realize that either. I kind of assumed, but I guess I shouldn't have assumed that, because I mean, one thing about with the Disney Wars and what J.J. Abrams was doing was that they did say they wanted to do more practical effects. So I guess I shouldn't be super surprised, but I guess I still am. I think that's pretty cool. That, as far as that model that you have the picture of over there, that's pretty neat. Seeing it, in real life, as it were.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that they were doing so much stuff actually practically with The Mandalorian. I first, when you think about a television production, you think about budgets and stuff. You just assume that they're trying to find interesting ways, to trim and keep the budget under control, and you just assume that involves digital trickery in order to save a couple bucks, here and there. But to see that the way that they're using a lot of the motion control and a lot of the ways that they're actually filming it, it's not so much that it's it is trickery in a sense, it's a lot of visual effects, but it's just the way they're creating the visual effects that makes it unique and different. And I was very surprised by that. So very interesting. I thought it was really very cool. So
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love those pictures. I've always thought that kind of work just looks so cool with those practical effects with those models and everything. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. So, but no, yeah. So I'm looking forward to this Disney. Again, it's going to be Disney Gallery, and I thought that sounds kind of cool. So anyhow, so that's my first story for pop culture this week. So tell me, Eric, what do you have for pop culture news?
I did want to acknowledge a couple comments from Amanda Sam first. Amanda Sam mentioned that Netflix has been burning through cash at a high rate, trying to get new content created for itself. Their debt situation has been seen as unsustainable, although the current lockdown may be a windfall. Amanda Sam, I got a great article for you later in Streaming Wars. Honestly, stay tuned, because I got a great article right up your alley and right up the alley of that comment. And then Amanda Sam also said, even robotic motion control cameras are continuing to come down in cost, so that they'll be increasingly accessible to smaller filmmakers. That's interesting, Amanda Sam. That's something I've got to look into. And I have seen some of that. Like I think I even saw something on B&H Photo, where they had a robotic motion controlled camera system, and and as I recall, it was quote unquote more affordable. So I think you're right. And I think also what you might be seeing is people actually making their own, because that happens a lot, especially in independent independent filmmaking, people will make their own rigs. And a lot of what's actually incorporated into these systems is actually more accessible than you might realize in terms of just finding in other kinds of products. And you kind of put them together and you can make it work. But that's interesting. It's definitely something I got to look into more as far as, robotic motion control cameras and things like that, because that would be great for practical effects, in any kind of a sci-fi genre where you have ships or anything like that. That's definitely something to look into for sure. But as far as like a pop culture story, I've got a few here. Let's see which one I want to kind of start off with here. Okay, here we go. This is something that I thought was interesting. So this is a reflection of the times, but it's what I consider sort of a positive spin on what's going on with everything, and kind of a fun story. Dave and I have even talked about this off camera, that I'm a big advocate of masks, of wearing masks during the pandemic and things like this. So I saw this story. This is from Men's Health. This is dated April 19th. The headline reads, Arnold Schwarzenegger wears a Terminator-inspired face mask while on a bike ride. And you can see a picture of him here. It's a very simple style face mask. It doesn't even have like loops or a strap for the back. It's just little cuts on the side. And it says, "We'll be back." That's the little message he has there. And you can see Arnold riding there on his fat boy bike. It's got the big fat tires and everything like that. You can see him all masked up. And it says, Arnold Schwarzenegger has a simple message for a world grappling with unprecedented times. Quote, "We'll be back." And he's delivering that Terminator-like message through a responsible, social distancing approved face mask. And what this is that Arnold Schwarzenegger has this foundation. It's called the After School All-Stars. It's a nonprofit which Schwarzenegger founded in 1992. The program provides free after-school programs to, quote, keep children safe and help them succeed in school and life. These programs include arts education, STEM training, and fitness development. But of course, they're currently on hiatus as schools around the nation are closed. So with schools closed, they can't provide their normal programming. They have decided to pivot to use their after-school staff to deliver groceries. So because they can't do these after-school programs right now, instead what they're doing is they're delivering groceries to these families involved with these programs of these high-risk youth. And what they're doing is they're selling these masks. You can go to their site. They're selling them for $13, $12.99 a piece. And obviously this is a fundraiser, so don't think like you're getting like this super high quality N95 mask. You're not, okay? But they're selling these masks, and I just thought it was a neat idea. It seems like a good way to raise funds for what sounds like a good program that itself has had to change because of everything that's going on. And again, because I am an advocate of people wearing masks, I just thought this was kind of a cool thing, especially if you're having trouble maybe finding one or you just don't want to make one yourself.
Well, that's interesting. That's very cool. I had seen, I think, a video that Arnold had posted. I can't remember if it was on Twitter or where it was. It's on one of the social medias where I follow him, and he had the mask on, was getting ready to go out and do the bike ride, and was kind of promoting this. But I don't think I quite clued in exactly what all was going on with it. But this is interesting. So very cool.
Yeah, I didn't know about this particular foundation that he had and what it did. But I think it's neat that because they can't really continue with their primary mission, apparently they're delivering food to people and things like that. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Very cool. Very cool. Are we good to go to another story? I've got, if you wouldn't mind pulling my screen up, talking about masks. So I thought this was kind of interesting.
There we go.
Anyhow, I don't know how to set this story up, so we're just going to get right into it. So this was on Deadline, and this was from April 16th, and it says that Universal and Amazing Entertainment team up for the Green Hornet and Kato feature. This is, and then this story is by Anthony D'Alessandro. Apologies if I'm saying it incorrectly, but it just says Universal Pictures and Amazing Entertainment are partnering on the Green Hornet and Kato, which is currently in featured development. It says Universal optioned the rights to the iconic characters first created by George W. Trindle and Fran Stryker in 1936. After Amazia co-founders Michael Helfand and Bradley Gallo took control of the motion picture franchise rights in a highly competitive bidding war back in January. Green Hornet was one of the early radio's most popular adventure shows, predating Superman, before being turned into 1940s movie serials from Universal. A 1966 TV series distributed by 20th Century Fox TV followed, introducing Bruce Lee, aka Kato, to the United States. The story centered around Britt Reed, owner-publisher of the Daily Sentinel. Armed with knowledge from his sources, cool weapons, and a supercar known as the Black Beauty, and teaming with his trusty aide Kato, Reed became the Green Hornet, a vigilante crime fighter, wanted by the police and feared by the criminal world. Evan Goldberg and Seth Rogen adapted, executive produced, with the latter starring in a 2011 action comedy of the IP for Sony, which opened at #1 at the MLK box office with $40 million and ultimately grossed close to $228 million worldwide. And that the Green Hornet film has actually just recently shown up actually on Netflix. Again, you can find more about this article over on Deadline. I just thought it was interesting that they're giving Green Hornet and Kato another spin. So that was kind of interesting.
I hope that they do a more serious take this time, because that was my biggest problem with the previous version. I think, Dave, you and I even talked off camera about this before. What really disappointed me with the most recent incarnation, the 2011 film you were just talking about, was I remember when they were talking about the whole idea, they were saying the central premise of that film was that Kato is cooler than the Green Hornet. And I was all like, you guys don't understand the Green Hornet at all. You know, I grew up knowing about the Green Hornet because my dad listened to the radio show. So my dad was a huge Green Hornet fan, and he was also a huge Lone Ranger fan. And a lot of people don't realize, because of that film, that the Green Hornet is a descendant of the Lone Ranger. He's a descendant of the Lone Ranger's brother. So he's like his great grandnephew or something like that. And that was not in the film at all, because the Green Hornet's supposed to be like a modern version of the Lone Ranger, and of course Kato is supposed to be like his Tonto. And of course, people remember the 60s series because Bruce Lee was in it. In fact, I actually have a version of that series. That's it's a film version. In other words, they made a couple of the episodes into a film to market overseas for Bruce Lee fans. And I have the version of that in my personal collection. And I just always thought it was a terrible idea to kind of make the Green Hornet kind of a buffoon, when that was never the intention. I actually was watching an episode of the 60s series one time. They were doing a marathon on decades, and I was watching it, and my daughter came up to me, who was 12 at the time. She comes up to me and she starts watching with me, and I explained to her the whole, who the Green Hornet was. That he was this, media magnate. That he was this media mogul, this person who owned a newspaper, and the way that he infiltrated criminal organizations was because he made it out like he was the bad guy, and he gave himself bad press. And because everybody thought he was a bad guy, he could more easily infiltrate criminal organizations and then basically, take over their plans. He could basically foil their plans. And she just thought that concept was brilliant. You know what I mean? She was like, that's really cool. And you really don't get that in the film at all, because again, they decided to make it an action comedy. So I'm just hoping that they're going to take a more serious take, because I think it's a really cool premise. And I'm not sure, Joss, if this was in reference to me, but you did say Me Too. Not sure if you're talking about your feelings about Green Hornet or something else that we were talking about. But yeah. And Manasyan says that Green Hornet was also vaguely reminiscent of Batman. I believe Green Hornet predates Batman. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, but I believe the Green Hornet actually does predate Batman. Is that correct or not? Dave? I think Dave might be having some technical difficulties with his headphones.
Sorry about that. Can everyone hear me now?
I can hear you.
So
I thought the Green Hornet predated Batman.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It depends upon when the original short stories were published, and I'm not 100% certain on that. But a lot of these... I
know the Lone Ranger does. I know the Lone Ranger does. And
yes,
Lone
Ranger does.
Is the basis of Green Hornet. Green Hornet is supposed to be like a modern version of the Lone Ranger. I know that. Manasan says he's reminiscent of He is reminiscent of Batman in terms of they're both, you know, they're both rich and they're both don't have any superpowers. And what is it that you're showing right now?
Okay, so what I have running in the background for those people who've never seen it, if you search on YouTube, there was actually a French Green Hornet fan film that was made many years ago that's actually pretty cool. So I thought it would be funny to actually, well, not funny, I thought it'd be interesting for those of you who've not seen it. I thought, why not? Let's, you know, I would just let this run while we're talking about Green Hornet and Kato. But you can find it on YouTube if you're curious to check it out. So, but it's a fan film all about the Green Hornet. And this was actually, a lot of people are talking about how they actually enjoyed this fan film more than the Seth Rogen film. I didn't hate the Seth Rogen film, but it was kind of disheartening to see the Green Hornet not taken in a more serious manner. But yeah, for those that are curious, but it was a French-produced fan film. So.
Yeah, I am familiar with this. I do remember when it came out. I don't remember if I actually watched the whole thing or not. Because this has been out quite a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, this has been out for quite some time. So,
yeah, so
I just thought it'd be fun to have on while we're talking about Green Hornet. So
yeah, I think I may have seen it when it actually first came out, but I haven't seen it since. But again, you know, I think this one has a much more serious take than the 2011 film did, you know, which again made the Green Hornet just a buffoon. And I'm not sure if Joss is backing me up that Green Hornet is older than Batman or not, because he just said Green Hornet. So, but I'm pretty sure about that because, you know, I can't be 100%. I know how old my dad is, and I know how old he would have been as a little kid. But when he was a little kid, you know, Batman was basically just coming out. So, if anything, they're pretty close together, I would say.
Yeah, I think they're pretty close together. But again, I'm not 100% certain. I mean, I could Google it here real quick. I mean, I know when Batman debuted, but I'm not 100% certain on the Green Hornet. I know that the Green Hornet has a second life because of Batman.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm doing the same thing. I'm just trying to look it up just for my own peace of mind here. Says he was created in 1936.
James actually just posted 1936, so it does look like Green Hornet actually does predate Batman. So there you go. There's your answer.
Yep. So I was right. See, every once in a while, I always say this. A broken clock is right twice a day. Always remember that. So.
All right. Well, very cool. Well, like I said, I just thought it'd be interesting to bring this up, that they're going to give Green Hornet another spin. I think the character's got tremendous potential, and more than we've seen so far. And I think a more serious take, I think could do quite well in today's current climate. The question would be whether or not they would do it sort of contemporary or actually set it back, you know, in the past, you know, because the Green Hornet was definitely more of a crime buster kind of guy. So I'd be curious to see if they try to bring it again to the modern day, or if they would actually set it back in the maybe the 40s. So
I
be
think it
interesting
could
to
work
see what they
either
decide
way.
to do with it.
I think it
Yeah,
could
it
work
could.
either
It could.
way. I think you can make it work if you put it back, in the past. I think you could even go even farther than his creation and put him like in the Prohibition era or something like that if you wanted to. But he could definitely fit in today's world as well. I think it could work either way. I just want to make sure it's a serious take. That's all. But I think it could work
Right.
either way. I've actually wanted to see. I've always thought it would be neat to have like a 50s Batman. You know what I mean, or a 50s Superman. You know what I mean? I always thought that would be kind of cool, but I don't think that'll ever happen in the current climate, especially at Warner Brothers. But I think it could work either way for Green Hornet.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, that's going to be it for me and my my pop culture news contributions this week. So, do you have anything additionally for pop culture news?
Well, here's one that I thought maybe that you would have been aware of as well about. Maybe you did kind of hear about it like in the peripheral. This is a Variety article, and it says Justice League Dark and the Shining inspired series from Bad Robot is set at HBO Max. And of course, HBO Max is the next big thing that's going to be coming into the streaming war soon. But we had talked about Justice League Dark before, and that Bad Robot was going to be involved with this. So it says HBO Max has handed out 3 production commitments to 1-hour dramas from Bad Robot Productions, including one set in the Justice League Dark universe. In addition, HBO Max and Bad Robot have teamed on the series Overlook, inspired by Stephen King's The Shining, and Duster, an original drama co-written by LaToya Morgan and Bad Robot's J.J. Abrams. It says all 3 shows will be executive produced by J.J. Abrams and Bad Robot's head of television, Ben Stevenson. The 3 shows are the first television projects set up at HBO Max under Abrams and Bad Robot's mega deal with Warner Media that was unveiled in September 2019. I remember, Dave, I think you talked about this when this first happened back in September 2019. You were talking about this deal that Bad Robot had done. In terms of Justice League Dark, it says no further details are currently available about the Justice League Dark series, including which characters would be featured in the show. It says in the DC Comics, and I think that's interesting how they say the DC Comics, the team consists of members like John Constantine, Swamp Thing, Madame Xanadu, Deadman, Dr. Mist, and many others. It says the team was first introduced in 2011 with a live-action feature film based on the comic books, having been in the works for years. It was most recently reported in January that DC and Warner Brothers were plotting both film and television projects in the Justice League Dark universe. An animated film was released in 2017, with Keanu Reeves having played Constantine in the standalone film in 2005. So that's where it looks like we are right now with Justice League Dark. And there's another interesting thing here, Dave, that I thought you would be interested in. They talk about the fact that Justice League Dark is the latest DC project set up at HBO Max rather than the standalone DC universe. Others have included an Aquaman animated miniseries, and also an untitled Green Lantern series, and a series adaptation of Strange Adventures. Because I remember you talking about you thinking that maybe as time went on, as DC Universe kind of be pushed to the wayside for HBO Max. So this is a little bit of evidence that might be the way they're going.
Yeah, it'll be curious to see what they decide to do with a lot of the DC properties. And I wasn't too terribly thrilled about some of these developments. I was just because I was kind of hoping that, I have a feeling, and it's not that I've disliked everything that J.J. Abrams has done. It's just I feel like that J.J. Abrams has been allowed to put his fingerprints on too many things at this point. Whether you look at Star Trek and Star Wars, and now we got to let him walk into the DC universe. I'd like to see more varied creators brought into this material, and not have it just be kind of the same people over and over again. I don't understand the idea of having, Bad Robot necessarily do this. I mean, I'd rather see, just some different, creative people involved. So that's pretty much my my take on this. So, and then Eric, can you hear me? I think we might be having some technical issues here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I am not what he's done with or Star Trek. That I'm really happy about the comments that he made.
Well, I think that we might have just lost Eric. So I guess I'll just kind of move forward here until Eric comes back into the stream.
All right. So the issue was on my side. I guess I was having connection problems.
Okay, cool.
Because they could hear you, they couldn't hear me.
Cool.
Because Josh says they could hear you. Are you able to hear me at this point?
Yes, I can hear you just fine, and I apologize if anyone can hear any feedback, because I've also had some technical issues. So I've actually gone from my headphones to using actually the external mics on my laptop. So we're just kind of plagued with technical issues here tonight, but we will continue to move forward. And Eric, I think you were just talking about how that maybe you were kind of agreeing with me that just the idea of J.J. Abrams' production company putting their hands all over the DC universe after they just put their hands all over Star Trek and Star Wars, it's a little bit too much of the same people doing the same kind of stuff.
Well, beyond that, I'm just not a big fan of what he did. I'm not a fan at all of what he did to Star Wars. I hate what he did to Star Wars. I think it was an abomination. And I'm not a big fan of the Kelvin Star Trek either. I own the first film, but I refuse to watch the other two because of comments that JJ himself made about not really liking Star Wars and being more of a Star Trek guy. And then the thing that he does with his next Star Wars movie is literally he rips it off completely. His Star Trek 2 is basically a ripoff of the original Star Trek 2. And my respect for him just went in the toilet after that. So I have the same concern. You know what I mean? I don't really like to see him being involved with so many different franchises. But you talked about it before, so I thought it was something we should talk about.
Interesting. Yeah. Do you have anything else for pop culture news, or are we ready to?
I have a lot. And actually, I got some stuff that I think is kind of fun. So, because I went and looked at a lot of different articles. Here's something that I thought was interesting because I actually participated in this in a weird way, I guess. This is actually a CNN article, and it says, "Stream The Phantom of the Opera" by Andrew Lloyd Webber for free this weekend only. And I guess this is actually dated. Maybe you can't see it anymore, which is a shame if you can't see it anymore. But it said, musical lovers, it's time to pause whatever you're watching on Netflix. Andrew Lloyd Webber's The Phantom of the Opera, staged at London's Royal Albert Hall in 2011, is now available to stream free on YouTube for this weekend only. So grab some snacks, dim the lighting, and get ready to bring Broadway into your living room. The free musical is available on Webber's The Show Must Go On YouTube channel. Viewers are invited to donate to the Actors Fund, which is raising money for COVID-19 emergency relief. So I actually did watch this, and I just came across it when I was looking at YouTube. I didn't know that they were doing this. And I'm sorry that I guess a lot of you have missed it. But my understanding is that they're going to be doing more content on this channel. So if you look for The Shows Must Go On, what they're doing is they're trying to raise money for the Actors Fund, which I believe, actually it says here, the Actors Fund provides emergency financial aid to help cover essential medication costs and basic living expenses to those affected. So it's basically it's basically a safety net for actors. And I thought this was really interesting and really cool. I had the privilege of seeing the Phantom of the Opera, one of its touring versions in Tempe, when they actually had it at the Gamage Theater in Tempe. And I was just blown away by it. I do have to say, unfortunately, it is much better in person, folks, than it was on YouTube, but it was still excellent. It was still an excellent production. And this was the 2011 25th anniversary. So they actually had like a lot of the old stars from previous performances come on stage and sing and all that. And they did a full performance with the one of the current casts, or at the time that this was made in 2011. So my understanding is they are going to do more of these. So I thought I would just kind of put it out there. For me, this is just one of those musicals that I absolutely love. Again, it is better in person. I got to say it is better in person. But if you can't see it in person, which obviously you can't right now, this is the next best way to see it. I don't know. Have you ever seen Phantom of the Opera, Dave?
Well, I mean, I've seen the film, but I've never actually seen it live. I do enjoy live theater, but it's just one of those productions that, for one reason or another, I never had the opportunity to see. I think probably, I'm trying to think what the most elaborate live theater production I've actually seen is. But I used to make a point every year when I lived in Memphis, Tennessee, to go to Theater Memphis, and I would see Christmas Carol every Christmas. At the Orpheum in Memphis, I saw, Peter Pan, like all kinds of different things over the years. But I guess I just never really had the opportunity to see the Phantom of the Opera. And I've actually never been to New York. Even though I worked for DC Comics in New York, I've never actually been to New York.
Yeah, I've never seen anything on Broadway. I've been on Broadway. I've walked on Broadway and looked at all the marquees and stuff like that, and sat there and dreamed. But I saw the touring version of it. I saw it in Tempe, Arizona, at the Gamage Theater, which is at the ASU campus, Arizona State University campus. But it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. The person who played the Phantom, I wish I knew who he was, because I need to look him up. He was so good. But this version was also very good. And like I said, I guess it was only available for a weekend. But my understanding is they're going to do more of these. And again, it's for the actors, because many people forget, especially in theater, but even in television, many actors, they really struggle. They never really, quote, make it in terms of really being able to sustain themselves and their families and all that kind of stuff. There's kind of that joke. I've heard that joke in LA where people will say, I'm an actor, and your response is, so where are you a waitress at? Where do you serve at? That's often the case. So we kind of think of actors as being, we think of the big Hollywood types that are living extravagant. So I do think that this is a good cause and something that people should consider in terms of especially with everything going on. If you have a little bit of extra or something like that, you might want to consider checking this out. As I understand it, there will be more performances, not necessarily a Phantom of the Opera, but perhaps other works by Andrew Lloyd Webber, where they're going to be putting these things on for free. And so that it's a good way to spend your time.
Looks like we might be having some more technical issues.
Did I hang up again?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So definitely check it out. As Eric was saying, it's probably worth, if you're into theater or, definitely worth checking what they've got going on. If you're in a position and you want to donate and help out, obviously that would be worth checking out, as well as obviously if they put any more of these productions available to stream and watch live not live or even a taped broadcast of one of the live productions. It's definitely a fun thing to check out. So very cool. James says, being in Boston, he's seen several on Broadway. That's very cool. Like I said, I've never even actually, I've been kind of through New York. I haven't actually been like on the streets of New York, I guess is the best way to put it. Which I feel kind of bad about in hindsight, because I used to have a standing invitation to tour the DC offices whenever I wanted. And of course, I just kind of dragged my feet and waited and kept thinking that day was going to happen. And of course, they shut the DC offices down and they relocated them out to Burbank now and out in California. And then James also says YouTube has Broadway.com and they have done some shows too. Well, very cool. Very cool. Definitely worth checking out. Definitely check out what Broadway.com's got going on and what they're doing there on YouTube. Sounds very cool.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right. So obviously, I'm a little touch and go. This is something that's just, I know I'm not the only one having this. In fact, I was just talking to someone to come look at my AC today, and he was having issues connecting on the internet. So I think everybody's having problems right now. So we'll just kind of deal with it as it comes, and hopefully we'll be able to work our way through it and it'll work itself out, or it won't. I mean, unfortunately, there's not much we can do about the quality of the stream. In fact, StreamYard, which we use for our show, says right on the site right now, hey, don't complain to us. This is probably a Facebook or a YouTube issue. Everybody's having connection problems right now. So unfortunately, it's just kind of the way it is, because a lot of people are using data right now, right? A lot of people are streaming. That's kind of the big thing right now, right?
That's true. I think all kinds of people are streaming all kinds of things. Part of the reason I kind of chosen not to live stream me drawing actually this last week or so is just the fact that I felt like the last couple times I've tried to live stream in the middle of drawing, all of a sudden my connection would drop. And I felt like it was probably aggravating for people who were trying to watch me draw, the fact that it wasn't a reliable connection. So I just kind of chose to, maybe give it a week and see where we are, and then maybe return to live streaming it. We'll see. I might, I know I won't be doing it this week because I've got too much going on. I've got a couple commissions and stuff that have come in that normally I don't take, but I've decided to take them. So we'll just kind of see. But all kinds of people are streaming all kinds of things. You've got all kinds of people selling things from their homes, to try and raise funds to pay bills and such. And you've got people that are trying to find ways to entertain, whether they're the big celebrities or they're just local people or regular people looking to kind of, see if they can connect with people. So all kinds of stuff happening right now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I do have another piece of I thought was fun news here. And this is a USA Today article. Let's see if I can get it to display properly here. All right. Yeah, these ads and pop-ups really kill me sometimes. So anyway, this is a USA Today ad, or article, not ad. I'm sorry. It says Val Kilmer begged to be in Top Gun sequel and other revelations from his new memoir. So there's a picture of Val Kilmer there. It says it's no surprise that Val Kilmer has some stories to tell. The actor has played such figures as Jim Morrison, Doc Holliday, and Batman. He rocketed to stardom in a fighter jet in Top Gun, part of the Red Sea as Moses in The Prince of Egypt, and acted opposite his icon, Marlon Brando, in The Island of Dr. Moreau. It says, but those stories aren't even the most interesting parts of Val Kilmer's new memoir. It's called I'm Your Huckleberry. So basically, Val Kilmer is coming out with a new memoir which I think is really interesting because this is a man that's had such an incredible career. And one of the stories that I guess he has in this, if I can get it to pop up correctly, he has some stories about some of his romances, like his romance with Daryl Hannah. He has a story in here, I guess, about his romance with Cher. So there is a little bit of a kiss and tell in this memoir. But one of the most interesting things in it was that he talks about apparently that he wasn't interested in doing Top Gun at first. He actually thought Top Gun was really like cheesy when he read the script, and he had no interest in doing it. And then at the last minute, he decided to go ahead and do it. And now, with the sequel coming out, he really wanted to be in it. And for a lot of people that don't know, Val Kilmer had throat cancer, and his voice is very changed now. He doesn't sound like Val anymore because of his throat cancer. And it was kind of touch and go about whether he would be in Top Gun Maverick, in the new Top Gun film. But the memoir confirms he's in it. So he is going to be in it. He decided to do it, which of course, again, it was ironic because he never wanted to be in the original, but then he was begging to be in the new one. And him and Tom Cruise came up with something, and he said it was, it was great. It was magic. It was, they were all back again. So for anybody wondering about that, yeah, Val Kilmer is going to appear in the next Top Gun film, and he has a memoir out. I'm actually interested in seeing his memoir. I used to follow Val Kilmer quite a bit on Facebook because he was very active on Facebook, especially with his voice being the way that it was, and it was very difficult for him to speak or really do anything else. So he was very active on Facebook. And I actually was able to interact with him a couple of times back and forth on things. I know his mother actually lives in Arizona, and he has some connections to the state also in that because of Tombstone. He did a personal appearance in Tombstone, Arizona for one of the anniversaries of the gunfight at the OK Corral. So I just thought this was kind of fun and interesting story that Val Kilmer has a memoir out, and that he is going to be appearing in the latest Top Gun sequel.
Well, very cool. I'd definitely be interested in checking that out. I'm a Val Kilmer fan. I've talked about my excitement for the new Top Gun film, as well as my love of the original. And I've also talked to Wax Poetic quite a bit about how much I enjoy Batman Forever. I know some people don't like it, but Batman Forever is one of my favorite, personal favorite Batman movies. I have a connection to that film, which I've spoken on the show previously, but I just felt like that he was trying to bring something interesting to his portrayal of Batman, and I quite like Batman Forever. But there's been quite a few films he's been in that I really enjoyed. Whether you want to talk about, obviously, Tombstone. I love Tombstone. That's one of my favorite Westerns. I thought he was good in The Saint. And then also, was it The Ghost in the Darkness, the big game hunter in Africa he was in with Kurt Russell? That was an interesting film as well. And then also, I think he was in Red Planet. Wasn't Red Planet the one that he was in where the robot goes rogue? And they're on.
I'm not sure if I've seen that one. I do remember The Saint. I remember The Saint being a real big deal, and I really liked that movie. But he's been in so many movies. Obviously, he titled the memoir "I'm Your Huckleberry," so everybody remembers Tombstone, right, where he played Doc Holliday. I think that's just iconic. Absolutely iconic. So he's done so many things. Obviously, he was Batman. You know what I mean? So
right.
He's done so many cool things. It's just amazing.
Well, it's interesting too because they've actually made Funko Pops actually out of Doc Holliday and the Earps, actually, from Tombstone, the Kurt Russell film that Val Kilmer was in. So,
wow, that's cool.
Yeah, very cool. Do you have anything else for pop culture news?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, cool. So I guess if that's good, we'll go ahead and segue over into streaming wars.
That sounds good to me.
All right, so I'll just go ahead and set it up. So in the streaming wars segment, we talk about anything that's going on in the world of streaming. We were just talking about our difficulties live streaming. But beyond that, specifically, we're looking at things on the different either platforms, the different apps, the different services, the different kind of shows, whether you want to talk about, YouTube or Netflix or Disney Plus or Hulu, whatever it is, we like to discuss that in the streaming wars that's actually caught our attention or interest. I don't have anything for streaming wars this week. Nothing particularly caught my attention, but like I said, I've been busy trying to get the digital fanzine, the magazine put together. So tell me, Eric, what do you have for this week's episode in the streaming wars?
Well, unfortunately, I'm having some technical difficulties as far as sharing my screen right now. So I did have some streaming wars articles, but I can't seem to get them to load correctly. I guess that's because of the streaming problems I'm having. So I had a pretty good, which I can actually recall the meat of it, even though I can't bring the article up right now. They were talking about Netflix as far as their numbers have grown substantially, obviously because of the pandemic. So Netflix is doing quite well when it comes to subscription numbers. But there has been some caveats and some caution as well with that, because even though we've mentioned that Netflix is better positioned than many of the other streaming giants, simply because they have more content that's waiting in the wings that will be coming out throughout the rest of the year. But like everyone else, they are experiencing production delays and issues like that. And they're not sure how that's going to affect them long term, because even as they are able to put out new content that they're sitting on right now, it's going to be more and more difficult for them to catch up later to produce new content. So as much as they've been doing well with their actual subscription numbers, and their subscription numbers have been going up, they've been having a lot of problems as far as making new content beyond what they're already sitting on.
Interesting. Well, and we kind of figured that, Netflix's numbers, you would think would go up with what's going on. You would think most of the streaming services would see some kind of a pickup, with people looking to access different forms of content. Of course, later on the show, we'll be talking about Pluto TV and a lot of the other free services that are available as well. So there's a lot of different options for people that are curious to check out things on streaming. So it makes sense that their numbers would improve, at least in my mind.
Could you say that again, Dave?
Oh, I just go ahead.
The last part. Could you say that again?
Oh, I was just going to say that I could see where it would make sense that Netflix's numbers would increase, just because you're looking at people trying to access different forms of streaming entertainment and such, while everyone's at home as we shelter in place through the global pandemic. So
yeah, no, I definitely could see that. Absolutely.
So, and then also too, this is not really a streaming wars topic, but I just thought I'd mention it real quick in relation to streaming content. It's interesting because we have a lot of different people kind of coming into live streaming that haven't done a lot of live streaming before. Eric and I talked about this actually previously. The Joe Kubert School, we'd mentioned they're doing their Saturday classes, which I think are still currently going on. So you can sit there with your kids or you just yourself. And they have some of the different instructors from the Kubert School, and they're doing these free Saturday classes. They usually do free Saturday classes actually at the college in Dover, New Jersey anyway, but they've been actually broadcasting them live, obviously, and it's just the instructor working with people live streaming over the internet. But in addition to that, the Kubert School is actually taken to actually streaming a live show, it seems like just about every day or every other day. And they've been interviewing all different kinds of creators, people like Scott Lobdell, and I think Klaus Janson is coming up this week. So I would definitely keep an eye out, because there's a lot of different people coming on and doing live streaming and bringing a lot of interesting content. For example, I sometimes wish that people would spend more time talking to some of the legendary and the legacy comic book creators, because they have a lot of interesting stories to tell. And sometimes those stories, you may hear them in a panel discussion at a convention, but they're not always necessarily committed or recorded in a way in which it could be maintained for posterity. For example, there was a podcast years ago called Sidebar, and on Sidebar, they did it was in the round, because there was not a lot of people at, I think, this one Dragon Con panel one year, and one of the people that was in attendance in the room was Dick Giordano. So those of you not familiar, Dick Giordano was once managing editor actually at DC Comics. But in addition to that, Dick Giordano was a legendary inker and artist for DC and put together a lot of important projects. And he was actually, I believe, editor-in-chief when they did not only Dark Knight Returns, but also Watchmen. And in this little roundtable discussion, it was him and I can't remember the name of the other guy, another editor at DC. They had this little conversation. And what was really interesting in this conversation is Dick Giordano actually talked a lot about his background, actually having wrought at Charlton Comics back in the 60s, talked about the creation of a lot of characters that are fan favorites today, or highly thought of characters such as Captain Atom, whether you want to talk about Rorschach. Anyhow, it's just interesting because they got to ask him some very interesting, candid questions, and he talked about, how Frank Miller came up with The Dark Knight Returns, and how Alan Moore and him worked together to actually, cobble together Watchmen. And so definitely keep an eye out for these different avenues and live streaming things that are going on, because I think there's a lot of interesting opportunity to learn about all kinds of things right now. And it looks like Eric might have just dropped. Maybe he's going to come back in here in just a moment. So I'm going to continue to wax poetic. So I don't know if you can actually still listen to Sidebar. Sidebar was actually on iTunes for a long time, and I actually downloaded and saved that particular episode where they were talking to Dick Giordano. And of course, like I said, I just think it's interesting, a lot of the different live streaming things that are available to people. So, and then let's see here. Manasan as a comedy says, apparently Netflix has committed to throttle their bandwidth to avoid overburdening internet infrastructure during these times. Yes, I'd heard that as well. And I think there's a bunch of different providers that were talking about that they were going to be doing that in different capacities and forms in order to prevent the internet from being overloaded, even though I think the internet's being overloaded anyway.
Which is what's happening to me.
Just talking about that. So.
As we're speaking. But yeah, Amanda Sam, you read his comment, right?
Yeah, I did. I did read the comments. So
actually what I did is I went ahead and I moved to a different part of my house to see if that would help, and it seems like it did. So, but I'm definitely having some internet connectivity issues at this moment, unfortunately.
Do we want to go ahead and talk about Popeye and maybe cut it a little short tonight with all the issues, or?
It seems to be better now. The way that I am, it seems like that has resolved most of the problems. I think it was just the issue of where I was in the house, actually, because it seems to have cleared up quite a bit. You can hear me fine now, right?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay, cool. So because I did have one more article, if I can pull it up real quick. Let's see if I can find it. So unfortunately, my entire screen kind of went away on me, so I lost the article. But
the joys of live video.
Oh, absolutely, especially right now with with how things are right now, and with bandwidth and everything like that. it's definitely getting sucked dry. So, no, actually, I guess I don't have it. So I guess that I actually lost that one. So we can go on to the Popeye segment. Never mind.
All right. Okay. I'm going to switch the screen over here real quick. All right. So I guess we'll go ahead and.
That would be it, Joss. That would be it. Closer to the router.
All right. So for this week's retro review, we're actually going to be talking about Popeye. Popeye is actually available to actually watch on Pluto TV. It's one of their in-demand features. So it's not the Pluto TV. For those of you who haven't used it before or not terribly familiar, they have all kinds of content like classic cartoons. They have a channel totally dedicated to Doctor Who. There's a channel dedicated to American Gladiators, but you can watch a lot of different things, and it's all ad-based or ad-supported content. But it's interesting. A lot of the stuff that's available on Pluto TV, but they do have a lot of in-demand content, a lot of different films, and Popeye is actually one of those. And so when Eric and I were discussing, again, we're doing our quarantine stream special. We're looking for fun and interesting things for people to maybe check out that they don't have to pay for an extra service to enjoy. So you can actually watch Popeye for free on Pluto TV. I've actually been, my wife and I we watched a bunch of episodes of American Gladiators actually recently. So of course, Popeye, just a quick summary, Popeye, the film, this is actually from 1980. It was interesting rewatching the film. I didn't realize this was a Paramount and a Walt Disney Pictures co-production. That was a bit of an eye-opener. But this film is from 1980. The basic summary is that the adventures of the famous sailor man and his friends in the seaside town of Sweet Haven. Of course, this is based on, a lot of people may not realize, but it was actually called Thumble Theater, which was created by E.C. Seeger. E.C. Seeger was a very influential and popular cartoonist back in the day. He influenced a lot of people, such as, ironically enough, or not ironically enough, Will Eisner. So this film was directed by Robert Altman. Of course, it stars Robin Williams, Shelley Duvall, Ray Walston, Paul Dooley, Paul Smith, who I always think of as the Beast Raban from Dune. Just a really wonderful cast, a very interesting film. It still freaks me out that Robert Altman is actually the one who directed this. It is a bit of a musical at time. They have a lot of musical numbers. And to me, anyway, this is one of Robin Williams' more memorable performances in such an amazing career. And he had so many memorable performances. But this one still sticks out to me. So usually with the retro review, we start off by talking about how did we first hear about the film Popeye. So tell me, Eric, how did you first hear about the film Popeye?
It's hard to remember. When this film came out, I was very young, so I did not see it in the movie theater. Although I did see Empire Strikes Back, which came out in the same year. I did see that in the movie theater as a small child, and I was terrified. That's why I always remember that. But I didn't see Popeye in the theater. And I was trying to remember if we saw it on TV for the first time or if we rented it. And I feel like we rented it. And I feel like that's because, my father would have been familiar with the character Popeye as well. And he was always a big influence for me in terms of the types of things that I tended to gravitate towards. We talked about Star Trek, things like that. Even Star Wars. I mean, he was the one who took me to go see The Empire Strikes Back, took the entire family. So I'm thinking that we might have rented it, but I know whenever I saw it, I was very, very young because I didn't realize how much of this film I'd actually forgotten and had, I had no idea about. Like, it was almost like watching a new film to me. There's things that I invented in my head that never happened, that they're not in this movie. There's things in this movie that I totally didn't see coming because I didn't remember them at all. So all I can tell you was I was very, very young the first time I saw this. And oddly enough, the one thing that always stuck in my head and that was so vivid when I was watching it now was the horse race. I always remember the gimmick that the horse races, the horses were mechanical. They weren't real horses. That's the one thing that I had right about this movie from my childhood.
Well, that's very interesting. So I know that I saw this film with my mom. We did see it in the movie theater. I remember that she specifically wanted us to go see it. And I remember that we had to drive to a theater that we normally didn't go to, because I remember it seemed like it was a long car ride to get to the theater to see Popeye. But we did actually see it in the movie theater. I had loved the cartoons, obviously, as a kid. I think there's a whole generation of kids who probably never even seen the Popeye cartoons, but they were a staple of my youth growing up. And so I was quite familiar with the character from that. I didn't realize the lineage of the character that actually goes back actually to the comic strip, because it just wasn't something that was, I think, very prevalent at the time. It seemed like Popeye was more a character of animation, necessarily the comic strip. But I do remember going and seeing the film, and being mesmerized by it, and at times oddly horrified by it, because it's weird, because at times it totally captures the vibe and the feel, and visually at times the kind of the style of the original, animated cartoons. But at the same point, because it's live action, it's very slightly disturbing. And then additionally, too, some of the musical numbers, because I remember just as a kid being horrified because I just don't associate Popeye with musical, So the musical numbers kind of threw me off as a child as well. But I do.
And by the way, Dave, I did not realize this was a musical. That's how clouded my childhood version of this film is. I didn't know it was a musical until I watched it today. So, and I did see it as a kid. I know I did. So,
yeah. Well, that was one of the most vivid memories for me is the fact that it was a musical, because I was very, kind of taken aback by that. And then they kind of take their time leading up to Popeye eating the spinach and kind of getting the extra oomph for power or whatever he needs to, of course, defeat the villain as you go throughout the story. And it's interesting too, because the movie very much is a celebration of all the characters within kind of like the Popeye universe to an extent. There's a few that are not represented, but they spent a lot of time introducing all these varied characters and personalities in the film, which I thought was very interesting. And it is very, I find it as...
By the way, maybe a little too much time.
Yeah,
maybe true. a little too much time.
Right. But I do find the film entertaining still to this day. I think I end up watching this probably about every other year, or it seems like it's a pretty regularly that I watch it. And it's interesting because this film, in my mind, occupies that same time period where we have a comment here. Man of Sin says Robin Williams was quite musically talented. Well, Robin Williams is all kinds of talented in my mind. When you look at him playing Popeye and embodying that character so well in this film, and then you turn around and you see things like, his stand-up, or you see him in Good Will Hunting, or, I mean, he was so talented and such a tremendous performer and entertainer. He was always very entertaining. And I feel like he's one of those entertainers that's greatly missed since he's no longer with us. By
the way, Dead Poets is the one for me for Robin Williams for sure. I'd love to talk about that on the show sometime. Dead Poets Society. I love that film, and of course, it's a dramatic turn for Robin Williams. So yes, he was an amazingly talented actor.
Yes, I would definitely agree. And then we got another comment here. James says, after seeing The Shining, it was really hard to embrace Shelley as Olive Oil. I could see that, because it's funny, because when I think of Shelley Duvall, I only think of her as either being in The Shining or Popeye, and those are two drastically different things. So yeah, I could definitely agree with that.
But she does make a perfect olive oil, in my opinion. That's the one thing I'll say is like, as far as casting and everything in this movie, I would say even better than Robin Williams as Popeye as Shelley Duvall as olive oil.
Yeah, I'd have to say I think they did a good job casting all the way around throughout this film. Everyone visually seems to be right, and then their portrayal of the characters are all on point. Um, it's interesting. I take this film and it in my, because I do own this film. Besides having watched it on Pluto TV, I do own it on DVD, and it sits on the same portion of my DVD collection as Dick Tracy, because when I think of this film, I think that they tried very hard to actually adapt Popeye. Like, for good, for bad, they just went for it. They didn't spend a lot of time trying to sanitize or put it in a different package. You know what I mean? Or spend a lot
Other
of
than the musical thing, you got to call that out, because you're right. I even thought that as I was watching it. You're right. It has a very cartoony style. The physics are very cartoon, but the musical aspect is definitely not very true to at least the shorts and the cartoons that I remember.
Yeah, that's true. But I was talking just about in terms of like visually and the mechanics, and they don't really try to update the setting very much. It very much lives kind of in that same place. So for me, and like I said, again, this is just my opinion. In my mind, I put on that same shelf as Dick Tracy. With it was the same thing with Dick Tracy. They tried very much to adapt it and keep it true to what it was. Whether it needed to, whether elements needed to be addressed or updated or not, they just rolled it right out. They used a limited color palette to have it try and reflect, the printing limitations at the time when Dick Tracy was created. So it in my mind, it goes on that same shelf. And this film is an interesting oddity too, because this film came out in the success of Superman the movie. Superman the movie was a huge box office success, and a lot of people, a lot of different studios and producers ran around and they were trying to find other things that could hit as big as Superman. So it's interesting, in the wake of Superman, we got things like Doc Savage, Man of Bronze with Ron Ely. You got Robin Williams as Popeye, and you also got what's her name? Darn it, the chick from Blue Lagoon. I can't. Brooke Shields, who actually played. Darn it, now I can't remember it now. I love to pick on this movie too, and the name just escaped me. So you just got by to the skin of your nose there. But anyhow,
what's interesting is this really kind of represents that first era of comic movies. And I say comic movies because I feel like the studios didn't understand the difference between a comic strip and a comic book, because this comes out of the same era, like you said, of Superman, but also Little Orphan Annie. In fact, my understanding is that this film was greenlit specifically because Little Orphan Annie was being made by another studio, and Paramount said, "Well, what do we got? What do we got that we could do like a comic musical like that?" And they said, "Well, we own the rights to Popeye," and that's how that came about. Had you heard that story, Dave?
Yeah, I was familiar with that, and James got it in the comments right there. Brenda Starr, that was what I was trying to think of. Brenda Starr. It's weird because Eric's right, because in my mind I think of these as that first salvo of all these different things, and it did seem like the studios were confused between what was a popular, successful comic book that would make an interesting follow-up to Superman versus just comic strips. And I had heard that before, and there's a lot of interesting stories that surround this film too, in regards to the budget and the fact that they actually built Sweet Haven actually on the side. I forget what it is, like a side of a cliff somewhere. And then I remembered hearing a story that there was some kind of a hurricane or whatever it was, and part of the sets were destroyed. And there's all these crazy stories and myth and legends that surround this particular film.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that came up in my research too is, that set is still in existence because this was shot in Malta, and now it's a amusement park. Did you know that, Dave? The set, they built like this real little city for this movie, and it still exists today, and it's basically a theme park in Malta.
I had no idea. That's very interesting. Because I know that they spent a ton of money actually building the set for Sweet Haven, and a lot of it was very practical. And I think if I remember correctly, there were some issues where I think they had to build things to last because they were concerned about the weather and where it was, which is interesting because Malta is the site for a lot of films. One of my films, actually, The Count of Monte Cristo, of course, was filmed, had scenes filmed in Malta. Well, very cool. So as usual with the retrospective, what we want to do is we want to talk about how we first heard about the film. So we talked about that. Then we want to of course, revisit the film and talk about how we feel about the film today, having just recently rewatched it actually on Pluto TV. So tell me, Eric, how do you feel about Popeye today? Having just recently rewatched it, you did talk about it didn't really fit your memories of the film as when you were seen it when you were younger. But how do you feel about Popeye today?
Well, this is not a unique experience. I've had this experience before where I watch either a animated show or a movie from my childhood, and I remember it completely different than the way it actually was. Like I said, I wasn't prepared for the fact that this was a musical. That really shocked me as soon as I saw that and everybody was singing, and it was actually very disjarring for me. I was actually kind of discombobulated for a while and like, what am I watching here? Because it's just not the way I remembered it. It's also very long. This is like a 2-hour long musical comedy, which I think is a kind of an odd choice. I mean, I think that there was a lot of odd choices in this film, to be honest with you. I don't know. I don't think it's. How do I say this? It's a very unique film. So just for that reason alone, I think it's worth a watch. But I don't know how much it translates to a modern audience. I don't know how a modern audience really feels about this. In my research, ironically, I found out that Siskel and Ebert both gave it 2 big thumbs up. They both loved it. Leonard Maltin hated it and said that it was a terrible movie and just stick with the cartoons. And I guess maybe I'm in the middle of that somewhere. I didn't hate it, but it was jarring for me simply because my memory of it as a kid is so different than what the movie actually is. So I was like kind of shocked. And I kind of still am.
Well, the musical aspect of it definitely makes it its own unique production and definitely sets it apart from definitely the cartoons that a lot of us grew up watching. I
prefer the cartoons. I'll say that. I prefer the cartoons.
Yeah, and I would say I prefer the cartoons too, but that at the same point, I feel like again that of these films that came out during this era, there's a couple of them that I think are worth kind of revisiting from time to time and remembering because of a microcosm of kind of the spirit of creativity that existed. Annie is a classic film in my mind. And of course Little Orphan Annie. And I would put, Popeye isn't as good a film as Annie. I think Annie's a better film, but I do think this film occupies an interesting place, and I do think it's always worth discussing when you talk about these early adaptations of comic strips and comic book movies, because at times it's very much on point, and at times it's completely way off topic and doing something that doesn't quite make sense. When you think about, if you look at it from the standpoint of, just the cartoons themselves. But I do think that's also the same point. Just like, reading Gold Key Star Trek comics is kind of fun because of how wildly inconsistent they are at times. Because the spirit of Popeye is so close and so faithful, even though they do venture off into the wild woods and you're like, why are we doing a musical all of a sudden? It's still kind of it gives it a weird, quaint kind of charm. In a weird way, I think that's why it's still kind of oddly remembered for some people, is because the musical aspect of it makes it so unusual. Because I never see many people talk about, Doc Savage, Man of Bronze. There's a small cult following for it. But there's these other productions that you never hear really remembered. And I think the musical Robin Williams, of course, too, is part of the reason it's, wildly remembered and fondly remembered as well. But I think that's what gives it kind of its interesting kind of zing, because that's the thing about it that I always kind of find kind of interesting.
Were you aware that apparently most of the singing was actually filmed live? Were you aware of that? Which is another reason that it has sort of a very odd sound to it. In fact, I would say it's a very unpolished sound, to be kind, but it was recorded live. Were you aware of that?
I'm not surprised. I think I had heard that once upon a time, because it's quite a few years ago. I'd kind of delved into, I had found someone had written a kind of interesting, very deep dive into this film, and gotten into a lot of the different aspects of the production. And I think I remembered reading something about that, because that's the thing. There's a lot of oddities about how this film was produced. And that's one of the things I think that makes it worth actually remembering in a weird way. That's what I'm talking about, the good and the bad. And then Jane has a comment here. She says, I like that they stayed so true to Popeye's character. And I did too. That's what I'm saying. That's one of the things I think that makes the film as a fan, that's one of the things I like about it. Even though it does do these musical numbers and it kind of ventures and does some strange things from time to time, the fact that they do stay so faithful with the characters, I think, is what kind of gives it that sort of like permission to kind of, take a couple risks. If they just changed everything, or changed more than, changed a lot of it, and then also had it be a musical, I think it'd just be considered a travesty, because it would have gone too far. But no, I think it's an interesting film. I think it's definitely worth revisiting. I mean, for myself, again, like I said, I always seem to be rewatching this about every year or two. And I always kind of enjoy it. And I have a small circle of friends within the industry, and there's these certain films that we're always kind of talking about and revisiting because of how strange or how unusual, how unique we think they are. Popeye is one of those films that comes up in those conversation, even though it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it always seems like Popeye, Black Hole, and Tron are always coming up in the same sort of weird conversation about these films that we like, that sometimes we don't quite understand why. But we just enjoy them.
I would say, by the way, of that list, I would put Popeye at the bottom of that list, because I think Tron and Black Hole are better films. I would just put that caveat out there myself personally.
I understand it. It's one of those films. Like I said, I have this small circle of friends, and this is one of those films that often gets discussed. And I think the reason it's discussed, because at times it's so faithful and other times it's so wildly unfaithful. It's kind of like Black Hole. One of the things that's really interesting about Black Hole is it's such an interesting, Disney riff on Star Wars, but then you get to the end of the film and there's all these questions. Some people still say the film doesn't have an ending. I say the film has a very definitive ending. But other people say it doesn't really have one because they didn't know how to resolve the story. That's what I'm saying. It's interesting that it's still being talked about to this day, at least among my circle of friends, because I think the musical aspect of it is what helps it kind of give it a little bit more longevity, because it's a very head scratching thing when they start singing.
That was my reaction. I was like, whoa, okay. Yeah, I didn't remember that. I really didn't. So again, it was a bit jarring for me. It's just not the way I remembered the film. What I always remember is the arms. You can see it in the picture that you have up too. It's the big Popeye arms. So
I think the things that always stick with me that I always remember from this film specifically is, talking about the arms do stick out of my mind too, but it was that scene where he's fighting the guys. I can't remember if it was in the gambling hall or where it was, but where he's doing the when they do the speed bag and he's doing the speed bag with the one guy. I remember that very vividly because that was a very Popeye kind of thing from like the cartoon, that whole little bit. And then of course, at the end of the film, I remember the battle with the octopus, because that was very much a live action, cartoon Popeye kind of moment. Those were the ones that always definitely stuck with me as a kid. Very classic Popeye kind of stuff, with him sailing through the water in the Superman fist pose and hitting the octopus and everything. So, and that's what I'm talking about. This film has moments where it's so wildly and wonderfully accurate, and then the musical stuff is so kind of slightly like, what are they doing? Why are they singing? But I think that's what makes it a curiosity. I think that's what I'm saying. I think that's what makes it interesting and makes it a curiosity. So,
yeah, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that.
Cool. All right. So, do we think that's good for this episode?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're okay. I apologize about my technical difficulties tonight. I'll try to see if there's anything I can do. Unfortunately, I don't think there is much I can do, because that's just kind of the age we're living in right now. So, but I'll see if there is anything I can do, and hopefully it'll be a little bit smoother next time.
Very cool. And on my end too, I was having all kinds of problems with my headphones. So we're just having some technical issues this evening. But we'll hopefully have them worked out by next week. And then, of course, next week too, hopefully I'll be able to share a little bit more for the digital fanzine, which will be coming out soon. And we'll probably have some more other interesting announcements, hopefully too. But hopefully we'll have a date actually for when you'll be able to either get that in your email, you'll be able to go and download that. And then let's see. I was kind of monitoring the chat.
I'm going to leave that one for the end, for the sign off, Dave.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do is, I think we will announce the winner of the sketch card on the next episode, just because we have more people commenting than I realized. So I need to go through and pull all those together. Again, we're going to do the Batman animated sketch card. I am running a little behind getting out to the post office right now, because with everything going on, it's a little bit difficult to get to the post office at the moment. But should be hopefully happening a little later this week for those people who have been waiting. And then we'll announce the winner of the Batman animated sketch card on the beginning of next week's show. And with that, I think we're good to go ahead and go to the outro. I want to thank you for hopefully watching or listening to this episode of the Retro Rogues Live. Again, my name is Dave Beatty. I've been one of your hosts. You can learn more about me, see some of my artwork, find links to social media, find a direct way to contact me if for some reason, Facebook and whatever isn't working for you. You can find all of these things and so much more at my website. That's at davebeatty.com. That's www.davebeaty.com. And I want to thank Mr. Eric Alexander for being back as providing all these wonderful co-host duties and finding all these interesting stories in the streaming wars and the pop culture for those of us to discuss here on the show. Eric, please tell the folks at home where they can learn more about you on the interwebs.
Well, I'm most active on Twitter, and you can always find me there at BassGod14, BASSGOD14. You can see it there at the bottom of my screen. My DMs are open. I'm always open to suggestions. And then Joss has a couple comments for us. He says, Missy the cat forgot to comment tonight. And he also said, The Fisher King would be a great review. And with that, we will leave our viewers with the last word.